If you asked me what my favorite fighting game is, I would instinctively say Street Fighter II. It's the game I've put the most time into, and so many of my favorite fighting game memories are tied to that franchise. But if you were to really press me on the topic, I might surprise you by changing my answer. Given careful thought and consideration, there's a chance my final answer would be The Last Blade 2. I bring this up not to wow you of my knowledge of two different fighting game franchises, but rather to tell you that I'm one of those hopeless souls that has spent the last 17 years praying that SNK would continue the Last Blade series. As is so often the case, I was putting my hopes in the wrong place. While I held out hope for the return of Yuki, Lee Rekka, and the rest of the 19th century samurais, three former SNK superstars were cooking up something even better. To be flippant, Yatagarasu Attack on Cataclysm is the Last Blade Street Fighter mashup I never knew I wanted. It started its life as a 2011 arcade game that borrowed heavily from Capcom Street Fighter III Third Strike. After a successful crowdfunding campaign, the creators have updated the roster, cleaned up the visuals, and introduced a wildly addictive fighting game to a brand new Steam audience. Yatagarasu sports a gorgeous hand-drawn pixel look that fits in perfectly with the fighting game greats of the 1990s. The 11 characters are dripping with personality, and each handle the battle in completely different ways. Most of the women fight with swords and daggers, while the men use their strength and supernatural fireballs to win the day. Punches, kicks, and parries are spread across 6 different buttons, giving fighting game fans a setup that is both familiar and unique. These special moves will also stir memories, as most are accomplished using quarter-circle rotations and charging motions. Even the characters seem to be thinly veiled versions of some of your favorite fighters. It shouldn't surprise anybody that Yatagarasu has its own Ryu analog, complete with similar fireballs, spinning kicks, and uppercuts. My favorite characters are those willing to take down the competition with swords and knives. Hina may look like a typical schoolgirl, but underneath the pink hair is a masterful swordsman with a penchant for charge attacks. Chetta, on the other hand, is a large Zangief type who is ready to bring the Megadeth pressure. And then there's Kotaro, a new character that zips around the screen wielding a tiny dagger and bubbly personality. Whether intentional or not, the swords versus strength matchup is surprisingly compelling. The swords play is often mesmerizing to look at and adds a dynamic you rarely see in Street Fighter wannabes. While Match of the Millennium brought the King of Fighters characters into Capcom's universe, Yatagarasu confirms that a Ryu vs Samurai Shodown matchup is much more compelling. Although I stumbled at first, it didn't take long for me to warm up to this 2D fighter. When Yatagarasu Attack on Cataclysm clicked, it stuck with me like few games have before. I was immediately transported to some of my favorite 1990s memories, only to realize that I'm playing it all for the first time. I can almost smell the cigarette smoke wafting through the air at my local arcade. It's that effective. Unfortunately, the developers hope you'll bring all that 20-year-old knowledge with you. There's no hand-holding in Yatagarasu. The developers throw you into the deep end and hope you'll swim. There's a training mode, but it's woefully out of its depth when trying to explain even the most basic moves. You'll discover special ultimate attacks and how to parry through trial and error, not unlike walking up to an arcade cabinet for the first time. And it certainly doesn't help that every move has a long, nearly unpronounceable name. The vagueness extends beyond learning how to control your character. For inexplicable reasons, Yatagarasu offers 2 completely different arcade modes, each with unique stories. I like having 2 arcade modes, but they're both named the same thing and it's not immediately clear how they differ. This is just one of the many examples of the game feeling disappointingly incomplete. And then there's the online mode. Although the game comes with more internet tuning options than I know what to do with, it still took me the better part of a day to get reliable results. Eventually I jumped through enough hoops to find my way online, and it was largely a mixed bag. I ran into a few connection issues with players, as well as a number of matches that looked like they were being fought underwater. Just as I was about to give up on Yatagarasu Attack on Cataclysm, I found a room where everything ran perfectly. The matches were competitive, the lag was non-existent, and everybody was rotating like an old-school arcade. Sure, I lost more than I won, but I had a giant grin on my face the whole damn time. When running smoothly, a competitive Yatagarasu room is hard to top. Speaking of things hard to top, The game's presentation is in a class all its own. Every character is rendered with a loving attention to detail, complete with memorable animations and poses. Their moves are dramatic, but never too flashy. This isn't Marvel vs. Capcom, so don't expect the over-the-top fireworks that you've come to expect from modern fighters. The backgrounds are also classy, and they even change as the fight drags on. Yatagarasu Attack on Cataclysm is a love letter to some of my favorite Capcom and SNK fighting games. It's familiar without feeling redundant, and an absolute steal at $15. Some gamers may be miffed by its vague nature and online setup, but don't let that keep you from one of this year's best fighters. Hey, thanks for watching my review. Normally I would tell you about the upcoming reviews I'm working on, but this time I'm going to wish you a happy 4th of July. Unless you're not in the United States, in which case, you know what, actually, no. I'm gonna stand by it. Happy 4th of July to everybody, whether you like it or not. It's there. Hit the subscribe button. Maybe I should have mentioned subscribing before forcing the 4th of July thing on you. Well, I'll see you soon.